They used to say, screaming in your sleep was harmless, a leftover glitch of the human brain, trapped between dream and reality. But in 2025, new research began to suggest something darker. Those screams aren't random at all, they're warnings. That discovery started with one man, Daniel Reyes, a 27-year-old grad student in Portland, Oregon. Daniel had been living with a problem so disturbing, his roommates threatened to kick him out. Every night, without fail, he would scream himself awake. Not just startled gasps, not muttered crisp-piercing, blood-curdling shrieks that echoed through the walls. Sometimes once, sometimes several times a night. He remembered fragments of dreams. A figure at the end of his bed. The sound of bones snapping. A whisper that grew louder and louder until it became a shriek in his own throat. Doctors first called it night terrors, a sleep disorder. But Daniel insisted it felt different. It's not just fear, he told them. It's like something's trying to get through me. That was how he ended up in the Northwest Sleep Research Center, strapped to wires, with electrodes glued to his temples, and a camera watching every move. The first night, nothing happened until 3:15 a.m. Daniel shot upright in bed with a scream. So violent, the monitors nearly shook off the table. His body convulsed, his chest heaved, and his hands clawed the sheets, as if he were fighting someone invisible. The data stunned the researchers. Daniel's brainwaves didn't match any normal stage of sleep. Not REM, not deep sleep. It was something else. Dr. Leila Monroe, head of the project, leaned over the monitor. "This isn't human sleep," she whispered. "This looks like intrusion." The second night, it grew worse. Again, at 3:15, Daniel's scream tore through the lab. But this time, the temperature in the room dropped nearly 10 degrees in less than 30 seconds. Frost formed on the window. The thermostat hadn't moved. And in between his screams, Daniel muttered a single word over and over again. "Marrow, marrow, marrow." When questioned in the morning, Daniel looked hollow, like he hadn't rested in weeks. He described the same dream. A tall, skeletal figure, with skin the color of ash. It didn't speak, it only watched. But when he asked its name, it leaned close and whispered one word: "Marrow." At first, the team thought it was a hallucination. But when Dr. Monroe dug into historical medical archives, she found something terrifying. All across the world, Hungary in the 1800s, Brazil in the 1950s, Japan in the 1980s, there were cases of patients who screamed nightly in their sleep. And in over half of them, records showed the same name repeated: Marrow. Coincidence? Maybe. But if it was the cruelest coincidence in medical history. Dr. Monroe began to form a theory. Screaming wasn't just the body's way of processing fear. It was a barrier, a way to keep something out. And if the screaming ever stopped, something else might get in. By the third night in the lab, the research team was already on edge. Some of the assistants whispered about quitting. No one wanted to admit it, but everyone had felt it. The sudden chill. The way the lights flickered at 3:15. The heavy pressure in the air. It wasn't just Daniel who was suffering anymore. That night, they gave Daniel a sedative to help him relax, but it didn't work the way they hoped. His body fell limp, his breathing even, but when 3:15 struck, his eyes snapped open, completely white. He didn't scream right away. Instead, he sat upright in the bed, staring at the camera lens with an empty expression. Then, slowly, his mouth opened wider and wider until it looked unnatural, his jaw stretching far beyond what should have been possible. The scream that followed wasn't Daniel's voice. It was deeper, hollow, almost inhuman. The sound ripped through the speakers, rattling the equipment, and shaking every person in the control room. One technician vomited. Another ran out crying. Dr. Monroe tried to steady herself. Stay with him. Record everything. The EEG monitor went wild, spikes of activity no human brain should be capable of. And in the middle of the chaos, Daniel spoke again, though his lips barely moved. He's here. He's standing in the corner. Every head in the control room turned toward the live feed of Daniel's room. Nothing was there, just shadows. But when the cameras glitched for a fraction of a second, some of the staff swore they saw it. A tall, skeletal figure, motionless, watching from the far wall. Dr. Monroe froze. Rewind that, frame by frame. But when they went back, the footage was clean. The next morning, Daniel had no memory of what happened. But the staff couldn't shake the image or the sound of that scream that didn't sound human at all. It was around then that one of the assistants, Aaron Lewis, began to complain about strange dreams of his own. He said he woke in the middle of the night, gasping for breath, hearing whispering voices in his room. By the end of the week, 3 staff members had quit. Dr. Monroe, exhausted but determined, pushed forward. She began combing through even more records, chasing a pattern. What she found was even darker than before. In many cultures, the figure wasn't just called Marrow. It went by other names: the Ashman, the Hollow Watcher, the Sleepless Guest, and in every case, the stories were the same. Victims screamed in their sleep for weeks or months. But once the screaming stopped, the victim was found dead in their bed, eyes wide open, mouth frozen in a silent scream, their body cold as if they had been dead for hours. Monroe realized the horrifying possibility. The scream wasn't the illness, it was the only cure. One night, as she typed her notes in the dim office, she heard it faint, low, echoing down the empty hallway of the lab. A scream, but not Daniel's. It was Aaron. She ran toward his temporary quarters. The door was locked. When she forced it open, she found Aaron sitting up in bed, eyes rolled back, his throat torn raw from screaming. On the wall above his bed, written in what looked disturbingly like blood, was a single word: Marrow. Security swept the room for evidence, but they found nothing: no blood, no signs of forced entry. The writing on the wall had vanished by morning. Aaron swore he hadn't done it himself, but he couldn't explain what happened. His throat was so damaged he could barely speak. Dr. Monroe ordered him discharged from the project. But Aaron refused. "If I leave," he whispered, voice cracking, "he'll follow me home." The others weren't so brave. 2 assistants quit on the spot. The rest worked with trembling hands, refusing to stay in the building past midnight. But Monroe couldn't let it go. The phenomenon was escalating, and she knew it wasn't just about Daniel anymore. Something was breaking through. On the 5th night, she insisted they record from multiple angles: standard cameras, thermal, even an old military infrared unit. Daniel's sleep cycle had become predictable. Normal rest until 3:15, then the rupture. When the moment came, the lab plunged into chaos. Daniel's body convulsed violently, his scream ripping through the walls like a blade. The thermal cameras showed something horrifying: elongated humanoid shape, cold as ice, standing inches from Daniel's bed. The figure didn't move, didn't breathe. It simply hovered, its outline stretching in unnatural directions, like its body was too thin for reality to hold. And then, for the first time, the figure turned toward the camera. Several staff screamed. One fainted. The feed distorted, warping the image, but the outline remained a skull-like head, empty sockets where eyes should be, a grin that stretched impossibly wide. The footage cut out, every monitor going black at once. When power returned, Daniel lay unconscious, but still breathing. His lips, though, were moving faintly, whispering a phrase that chilled Monroe to her core. The scream keeps the door shut. Stop me from screaming. And the door opens. That night, Monroe drove home, exhausted, shaken, desperate for sleep. But when she closed her eyes, she dreamed of the lab empty, dark, except for the echo of screams bouncing off the walls. She woke at 3:15 a.m. exactly. Her throat hurt, and her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message was short, and it froze her in place. "You screamed. I heard you." The next morning, Monroe didn't tell anyone. How could she? If the phenomenon was contagious, admitting it might only spread the panic. But she couldn't hide the bags under her eyes, the way her hands trembled when she adjusted Daniel's electrodes. By the sixth night, every remaining member of the team had reported nightmares. One assistant saw shadows pacing in her apartment. Another woke to find fingernail scratches on the inside of his bedroom door. The screams were spreading, and poor Daniel, was deteriorating. His body grew weaker, his skin pale. He confessed to Monroe that he no longer felt like himself. "When I scream," he whispered, "I feel something being pushed back. But when the scream ends, it's closer than before." What happens when I can't scream anymore? Monroe had no answer. That night, as she reviewed footage, she paused on a frame that shouldn't have existed. A single second of corrupted video showed her office, her desk, her chair, her bookshelves. But sitting in her chair was the figure. Tall, skeletal, grinning. The timestamp was 3:15 a.m. She hadn't even been in the office at that hour. By the seventh night, the lab felt less like a research facility and more like a haunted asylum. No one joked anymore. No one made small talk. The staff moved like shadows, silent, jittery, waiting for 3:15 a.m., like prisoners awaiting execution. Daniel looked like death itself, skin gray, lips cracked, eyes sunken deep. Electrodes barely stuck to his clammy skin. His body was wasting away. But the thing inside him was only getting stronger. Dr. Monroe couldn't stop trembling as she checked the monitors. She had barely slept in days. Each night, she woke at 3:15, throat sore, sometimes with blood on her pillow. She told herself it was stress, but deep down, she knew. The scream was in her now too. When the clock hit 3:15, the lab lights cut out. Total darkness, then Daniel's scream. But it wasn't just his. This time, every speaker, every microphone, every device connected to the lab echoed with overlapping shrieks. Hundreds of voices at once. Men, women, children, all screaming in unison, as if trapped in some unseen place. The backup power flickered, bringing the monitors to life. The cameras didn't just show Daniel anymore. They showed every room of the lab. And in every frame, the figure was there. Sometimes standing in the corner. Sometimes crouching on the ceiling. Sometimes pressed right up against the lens, grinning. "Shut it down," someone screamed. "Turn it all off." But the equipment wouldn't respond. The buttons stuck, the cords overheated. It was as if the lab itself had become part of the nightmare. Daniel's body arched off the bed, his scream warping into static, into words. His mouth stretched, lips tearing, as the voice that came out no longer belonged to him. The scream keeps the door closed. But too many screams. The walls shook violently. Dust rained from the ceiling. The glass of the control room cracked in a spiderweb pattern. And the door must open. Monroe ran to Daniel, grabbing his hand. "Fight it. Don't let go." For a brief second, Daniel's eyes returned terrified, human. He squeezed her hand weakly. Then his jaw dislocated with a sickening snap. The scream that came next shattered the overhead lights. Every monitor in the lab displayed the same thing. Not Daniel, not the room, but a black void, endless and hollow. From the darkness, shapes moved thin, skeletal figures, hundreds of them, rushing toward the lens. And then, silence. The cameras went dead. The screaming stopped. When the emergency crew finally arrived hours later, they found the lab abandoned, equipment fried, doors locked from the inside, every clock frozen at 3:15. No bodies were ever recovered. Not Daniel's, not the staff's, not Dr. Monroe's. But in the weeks that followed, reports began to surface across the country. Families waking to screams at exactly 3:15 a.m. People whispering about dreams of skeletal figures standing at their bedside. And every story ended the same way, with the victim whispering a single word before vanishing without a trace: marrow.